Welcome back to the Critical Moves podcast. I'm Al, and today we're going to be taking a look at DLCs. The best, maybe. The worst, maybe. But to join me on this journey into downloadable content, I have the legend, that is Adam, hailing us from Poland. Are you well?
Dzień dobry. Hello, guys. I'm well.
Excellent. And the other legend, the main man. Don't tell Adam I said that, but Jack's with us as well.
Hello, everybody.
At least we got more words out of you this time. I think last time you just said hi, and that was it.
There's not much to say.
Jack's a man of very, very few words until you read his review of Heart of the Machine, which is on our website. So go and check that out because it is just exceptional. You know, praise be to Jack, who knew he had it in him. But anyway, the purpose of this episode is for us to look at downloadable content, DLCs, and the best ones. And that could be best in terms of the amount of content that it brought forward, or it could be if it was transformative in some way. So I'm going to come to Jack first. What stands out for you as an example of a brilliant piece of DLC?
Okay, interesting question. I feel like it can be a few things. I think really what makes a good DLC based on the game is if it is an expansion of existing systems that people in the community have been asking for, or they're expanding those systems so much that it's justifying a price tag for DLC. It's not a free update doing that. So it goes so far in a direction to flesh out a system that people have liked about the game, or even the developers themselves were passionate about, but just couldn't take all the way there. Or if it does something to just make a positive contribution to the content already in the game. So in a lot of cases for games like previous turn-based or even some strategic RTS games, DLCs or expansions are literally just a handful of additional campaign missions onto the base game. They're like a sequel that take place after the game is over, but those are just as considerate to me as far as they're considerable to me as good DLC. So I think it's kind of up in the air what you would consider a good DLC. Some people would just say it's a DLC that makes them happy, and then some people would say it's a DLC that justifies its price tag. I'm a little bit more of a logical person, so I always try to weigh things as value to me. So I break it down into numbers.
That was a bit of a non-answer. I mean, there was lots in there, but I asked you to name one, and you didn't.
Oh, you asked me to name one?
Yeah. Was that not the question?
I thought you asked me what made a good DLC.
I think I asked you for an example of it.
Oh, my bad. Okay. In that case, I think a great DLC would be so... I mean, if we just go ahead and I steal the spotlight with this one and take the answer from both of you, in the history of Stellaris, there's a number of expansions that have come out to flesh out different gameplay systems. I think my favorite would probably either be mega corporations before they were ruined in this new update 4.0. And so for a long time, playing a mega corporation was like one of my favorite things to do in the game. That DLC was fantastic. And obviously Utopia, the first one, is like a must buy for people who play the game. Absolutely a must buy. And they've also just come out with, what was it? The new Spiritualist DLC that I think it's Shadows of the Shroud or
It is, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I've been having so much fun with that because I usually play Spiritualist Empires now. So,
now, not so long ago, we did an episode where we talked about Paradox, and we weren't really kind about their DLC strategy and their philosophy. But it would appear that what they do actually produce is really, really good. Can you see where there's a bit of almost like a conflict of interest, or a bit of a weird sort of situation going on where we don't like, or we disagree with some elements of what they actually do, but yet when asked to name great DLCs, you go immediately to Paradox and to Stellaris.
Man, there are so many of these DLCs at this point that, Paradox, they publish, 3-4 DLCs a year. So you, even if 70% of them is bad, you can still find the best one, like Utopia, that Jack mentioned, or for example for Hearts of Iron, this is No Step Back DLC, which is basically overhauled the whole gameplay of the game. You see, and to compare it to latest Hearts of Iron DLCs, I don't even remember the name, but there are like 2 focus trees, so this is nothing. So yeah, like if you publish something 10 times, even if you have success rate of 10%, you still can look for really great things happening.
I suppose there's that. I think it was Joseph Stalin who said that quantity has a quality all of its own. And do we have a situation with some of these companies where they think, well, if I throw enough content out there, and when we were speaking to Periphilosof on the last episode, one thing that I didn't bring up with him was in one of his videos, he was quite critical of Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition because of the amount of DLCs that were being put out by them in terms of, is there enough substance behind them to justify bringing out another one, then another one, then another one. So Stellaris, Paradox, Stellaris, they're throwing many DLCs out. You say, what, 3-4 a year, maybe even more if you factor in species packs and flavor packs or whatever there might be. Is it a good thing that we are getting new content at all?
Yeah, I think there's a deeper part of the whole discussion too, because Adam and I both quoted, and he hopped onto my quote about Utopia being a great DLC for Stellaris as their first actual expansion. The thing is that that's kind of not really so much anymore, but it's kind of controversial because when Stellaris came out, when Utopia came out, people didn't necessarily, I don't know if at the time, because I didn't play Stellaris at that time, if people necessarily felt like there was something missing from the core of the game, but Utopia added in Ascension perks, it added in megastructures, it added in tons of features that have consistently been built off of by future expansions and are almost necessary to feel like you've actually played through a whole campaign with your empire in Stellaris, which is why it's quoted as the must buy now. And I think comparable to that, recently Victoria 3 just got a DLC I don't remember the name of, and I haven't personally played it, but I think it's kind of a similar situation where Victoria 3 is being well received with this new DLC. But when Victoria 3 came out, it was almost like a Utopia situation with Stellaris, where you have a game about the Victorian era growth of your individual nation state, and you are expanding your industry, your manufacturing, your infrastructure, rising through time. But one thing that game was absolutely missing that people either could put their finger on or just were too engrossed to realize was that there was literally like almost non-existent gameplay mechanics for trade between nations. There was no international market for goods. So if you were a landlocked country that was not able to maintain its own economy with its, maybe even with its neighbors nearby, you were kind of like, it made playing certain countries that much harder. Anyways, this new DLC is like a Stellaris expansion for Victoria, just a normal Paradox expansion that really goes all out. And it completely adds tons of mechanics for international trade and using infrastructure that interacts with other nations in the world through diplomacy. And that's so interesting, but it's kind of controversial, right? Because even if that is a great DLC, there are things like, to go back to what you're saying, Al, I 100% think, and I know I said this on the Paradox episode we had, that over enough time of the lifetime of a game like Stellaris, you're going to start getting expansions that you never would have gotten on the original game. There's no way we would have gotten the mechanics that we have now for Spiritualist Empires and Stellaris because they would have had to have spent 10, 20 years just making that game to come out with all of those features included. So I appreciate that years later, they're still giving their time to come out with like a mechanical expansion and a spiritualist expansion. But how many people are playing Victoria 3 at launch and wanting features that they have to wait several years for that should have been there at the beginning?
So I played Stellaris at the release date and I read the reviews, and basically it was considered really basic game, and everyone said it lacked something. Like right now, if you play Stellaris, you have this thousands of overlapping gameplay systems. Back then, it was really plain and simple game that it had some fun into it, but as you said, Utopia changed many things in there, and you can say the same stuff about lots of different DLCs for other Paradox games. You mentioned Victoria 3 DLC. Exactly, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mentioned No Step Back. It added railway system, and I don't know if you play Hearts of Iron 4, but basically this is right now the the core of the gameplay. It changed the game completely. I cannot even say like the game was different. Could even be called Hearts of Iron 5 at this point. This was how much they changed the gameplay. I don't remember, but I heard there was the same thing for Crusader Kings 2. There was also some DLC that changed the gameplay completely. So I would say that what makes the DLC great, maybe just say memorable, is when it changes so much things that people begin to recognize the game after and between DLC. Yes, Victoria before this DLC and after this DLC. Stellaris between the DLC, Utopia DLC and after this DLC. And exactly the same case with Hearts of Iron.
The expansion you're thinking of for Crusader Kings 2 was the Old Gods. It was one where you would be a pagan kingdom and you had to resist the onset of Christianity. And it changed the game fundamentally and was very, very well received and very, very well respected. There was something that, from your comments there, there was something that Ben Angel said in our episode where we talked about innovation in strategy games, and I can't remember the game that he mentioned, but it was a Rome type game, and he said he was bitterly disappointed because he realised that he had actually bought a game, he'd bought a vehicle for DLC. I know this is something that we're going to cover in a future episode where we're going to talk about the early accessification of games, and our game's just been released in a shit state and with the anticipation that there'll be content added over time. But when you're saying there, Adam, about Stellaris being released and it felt like there was bits missing, was the strategy for Paradox to always flesh out the game over time?
It depends. In case of Stellaris, I wouldn't say so because it was their first try for the Space 4X game. Like, they've never done it before. So, and even, I remember reviews in some Polish websites that said, nice try, let's do it better next time. And no one thought about adding DLC that will change the game. And on the other hand, Hearts of Iron 4 is a game already, after this huge wave of Paradox DLC policy. I would assume they somehow forecasted it. I don't know. They felt it will happen in the future. I would think in this way. But Stellaris is from the old age, and I sincerely believe they didn't know they would publish DLC that will change so much.
Okay, moving on then, because I've asked Jack what his best DLC was, or the one that he would say was outstanding. I'm going to come to you, Adam, and ask the same question.
I already mentioned it. It was No Step Back for Hearts of Iron 4. Basically, it added the whole logistics system to the game that had already 4 iterations. I played all of them, so I played the first, second one, third one, and the fourth one. And I would say that before this DLC, the gameplay of Hearts of Iron 4 and 3 were quite similar. After this DLC, the whole dynamic of it changed and gave so many possibilities. It's even hard to find right now the gameplay on YouTube that is without this DLC, because everyone focuses on logistics in this game. And it wasn't the case before. At this point, logistics is like, this is a game about logistics and war, I would say even. This game, as I said, was not good enough before, and after it is the... I just want to also do a honorable mention about DLCs for Civilization 5. Gods and Kings was the name of DLC. Also, I would say that without this DLC, the game wasn't complete. They added politics to the game that should be added in the first place.
What game was that? Was that not Brave New World?
Oh, sorry, Brave New World. Sorry. Brave New World. Okay, there were 2 DLCs, Gods and Kings and Brave New World. And for me, it's hard to distinguish them because I just bought both of them and it changed the game so much that I treat them as one. And basically everyone treats them as one at this point.
That seems to be Civilisation's way of doing this. They release a couple of DLCs and that seems to be it. But there's so much in them. Firaxis have a completely different strategy to what Paradox have. You look at and I appreciate that Stellaris do release some monumental DLCs. I mean, the ones you've mentioned, the one that really stands out for me is Megastructures. I thought that was just brilliant. They release so many of them, whereas Civilization, they tend to do 2 and then they move on to the next version of the game.
Yeah, that seems to be their strategy, though. It seems like what they're used to is Sid Meier gets the team together, they work on their game for a lifetime or a generation, and then they send it out, and then they get some generally positive reception for their Civ title, and then they take on at least what I feel like they started doing around Civ 6, because, forgive me, but I'm just not sure what the critical reception of for Civ 5 at the time was as far as missing features or lacking content, or how well they were, especially back then with, when Civ 5 released, being able to collate that community reception. But I know, having heard at the time Civ 6 came out specifically that there was problems with certain mechanic features, certain system features, it seems like what they did was start to focus that community reception, similarly to how Paradox does with their first DLCs, into the first DLC for Civ to include that update along with fleshing out those features, sometimes behind that content wall, that paywall. And then they expand on what features they were planning to have. And then it's the second DLC that's kind of like their send-off for the title. But that's just their development strategy. They're not like Paradox. They're not doing live service strategy games. Now, though, what we are seeing with Civ 7, notably, is that they've actually gotten enough negative reception, which is why I pointed out generally positive reception at the start. Because they've gotten enough negative reception with Civ 7 that they've seemed to forego their DLC strategy right now. I mean, I think they're still 100% on track to release 2 major expansions for Civ 7 like they did for Civ 6 and Civ 5. But it seems like, for all intents and purposes, that where we would have gotten at least DLC 1 or even 2 by now, we're instead getting their free anniversary update, their Test of Time update, and several other small updates between now and release.
But Civ 7 has released some DLCs. They almost feel very light. And when you look at them on Steam, look at the Steam reviews for every single DLC that's been released for Civ 7, they're all overwhelmingly negative with their reviews. And I think this is because perhaps we've had this complete change in strategy almost, it seems, from Firaxis, from releasing this mammoth DLC which adds new features, adds new functions, changes mechanics, to suddenly they're saying, oh, here's 2 new leaders and 2 new wonders. And it's like, well, we didn't ask for this. We want to see you introduce an entirely new system, like when they introduced religion to one of the older games or whatever it might be. So have they changed their strategy? And have they realized that it's almost like they've tried to take on a strategy of Paradox? There's been major blowback, and have they said, oh dear, we did this wrong? And is that why we're now getting this the major anniversary free expansion?
I guess at this point no one knows, because they tried to extinguish the fire that was the horrible release for the game, and this is the issue. So I think that you are right, they changed the strategy, but at this point I think they try to make simply the game better for people to play it and maybe sell in the future DLCs, but who will know? Like, I don't want to talk about Civilization 7, it was a huge letdown for me, but I can only say that it's still not in the state for them to release DLCs for it.
But they have released DLCs for it. And I think the issue is, and I think the reason why there's been such a pushback on these DLCs is because every single one of them that's come out, we look at it, you go, that should have been in the base game. That one should have been in the base game as well, because it is typically 2 new leaders and 2 new wonders, maybe 2 new civilizations or whatever it might be. But it's like, well, these could have easily been kept in the base game. And it's almost as if they deliberately cut the content out of the base game in order to release them for more money when you're already paying $70 or whatever it might be for Civ 7, which is at the high end of what people are actually willing to pay for a strategy game. And I don't want to do a repeat of what we did where we weren't very happy with Paradox's strategy, but this decision by Firaxis, I don't see any positives for the community, for the players. I don't see anything at all, because all they've done is said, here's a little bit of new content, which really should have been in the initial release. And that is, when we talked previously about predatory DLC practices, that is very predatory. And I think that as much as we were quite horrible to a degree about Paradox when we did our episode, we need to apply the same criticisms to Firaxis as well. At least with Paradox, when they release an expansion, it's bloody decent.
To be honest, at this point, I feel they're doing two things. Oh, maybe three things. First thing they're trying to do is fix the game. Second thing is because they are spending so much money on development and so much money on bug fixing and so much money on changing the core of the gameplay, they trying to make the spreadsheet for their team to look good and release DLC for this DLC to sell and raise money for them to keep on working on these fixes. Because imagine that you are a company over Firaxis. They released something that's not in a state it should be, it not sells in as good as it should be, and you can either, just fire the team or let it fix it. So they're trying to push the numbers higher by releasing the DLC they had prepared previously because they thought the game will sell well, they can release DLCs and so on. So this is kind of like pushed hard, like forced DLCs. And third thing they're trying to do, in my opinion, they're trying to make such precise number of fixes and bug fixes for us to believe in them that if they release DLC, we can say, okay, game was fixed, they release DLC that changes a lot of things, that fixes more parts of the game, but they fix some of it. So they're doing this calculation in their mind of what to fix, when to fix, what to add, what not to add, and on top of that they are pushing DLCs, small DLCs, for the spreadsheet to look better.
Is this firefighting by Firaxis? Because we talk about Paradox, and I think Paradox is a bigger company, and they could perhaps weather the storm of some negativity, but it would appear that typically they get positive reactions and positive reception to their DLCs. You speak very highly of Hearts of Iron. Jack speaks very highly of Stellaris DLCs. But I suppose if one of them doesn't work, they've got all these other games that they fall back on. You look at Cities Skylines, one which has just had the Race Day expansion for their 11th year anniversary. So they're still releasing content for Cities Skylines after 11 years. So Paradox almost have it nailed down. They do release a lot of DLCs, and we weren't overly kind to them when we talked about that, but they tend to be of a high quality. They tend to bring new things to the games, and that's great. Firaxis, the last game they released before Civ 7 was Marvel Midnight Suns in 2022. So you're looking at a long time, and I don't think that did particularly well, but you're looking at a long time between releases. And how do you keep a company going like that without having a hit when you release it, and Civ 7 wasn't a hit, and then be able to add content that people want through DLCs, and the content they've released people don't want? Are we in a situation where Firaxis, and I know we were to talk about DLCs and now suddenly we're talking about Firaxis being in some sort of existential crisis, but is that the situation we find ourselves in? Firaxis currently thinking, oh my God, we need to do something because we are going to struggle if we do not.
I think it's a flavor of that for sure, because I agree with Adam. Like I was also saying earlier, when you look at the state that Civ 7 is in right now, I think that they absolutely are planning to release DLC 1 and 2 as we would consider them when we compare them to like expansion 1 and 2 for Civ 6 and expansion 1 and 2 for Civ 5 that Adam just spoke about. But what I agree with Adam on is that I think that because they didn't get the positive reception they're used to for Civ 7, they had to do these free updates, and what they needed to do was work on the mechanics in the game that people were having issues with, so that they could get the game to a point where they could now sell the game. It wasn't even that they didn't have the sales that they might have wanted, which is the case. It's more so that in order to sell someone additional content for the game, you have to be able to sell people on the base game. And if it's something they previously were unable to do, locking the improvement of the base game behind expansions that they're used to is not going to achieve that. They need to build off the platform that they have and establish that for the success of that so that they can sell people on future expansions for Civ 7. What I did want to bring up, and I know you don't want to hate on Paradox though, is that you kind of have to compare their releases on this, their business strategies, like you've been trying to do. What I think is pretty clear about it though, is that when you look at Firaxis, everyone here is right. They have a long, lead time between development of their games and release of their games. That's why I referred to it as like a lifetime or a generation earlier. And so what Firaxis' business strategy is to make a game that releases with generally positive reception, to release several what you would almost call cosmetic DLCs or microtransactions to a degree, and then come out with major expansions, usually 2 of them for their titles, and then they immediately are, by the time of DLC 2, are probably in pre-production for their next title. I don't know, based on the numbers, because I don't have the numbers, if Civ 7 had a development cost that would have probably went over their budget for what they would have assumed that it was going to cost for them to develop Civ 7, and if it costed more than they could have made from the release of Midnight Suns and a very positively received Civ 6 and Civ 5. I don't know that they're hurting for money. But what I do know is that a business isn't trying to stay afloat all the time. A business is trying to maximize its profits every time. So at the very least, what they need to do is justify their efforts on Civ 7. And like Adam was saying, they need to be able to show a spreadsheet, not just to keep their doors open or their lights on, but in order to justify their work on the game. I mean, when you come out with a product, you're expecting to follow your business strategy. And to end this off very briefly, I think that the way Paradox does it is that they purposefully release a game to see what the reception is based on the work of individual segmented teams, where I don't know how many teams Firaxis has, but I'm sure they only have a handful, or if not 1 or 2 major teams that are working on all these games at the same time. Paradox clearly has multiple. They have teams still dedicated to just Stellaris and teams just dedicated to like Victoria and Hearts of Iron. So these people are workshopping these games, coming out with Europa Universalis, and then they're releasing them to see what the reception is. And then they're taking the community feedback, releasing free updates consistently, and doing expansions where the free updates usually launch with the expansions to justify people to come back and see the new stuff to buy. I think what you should compare Civ 7 to, instead of something like Stellaris or Victoria 3, is Imperator Rome. I think that if Paradox released Imperator Rome, what they were expecting was generally positive reception without a bunch of reviews telling them how much work they really needed to make the game a good platform, so that they could start pushing DLCs. And I think if the game was received well, it would have had the same life cycle as Stellaris and Victoria 3 at this point. I think the problem is that when it came out, it had mixed reviews, and the reviews basically were optimistic, but many of the reviewers were saying, I want this game to be good, but it's going to take years before this game is good, because it doesn't justify itself in Paradox's catalog or against Total War or any other games I could be playing with these features. And then when Paradox saw that, they looked at their sunk cost fallacy and they decided it wasn't worth their time and money to continue working on that game to make it a platform for DLCs. Because at the end of the day, they're trying to make platforms for DLCs, yes.
Just one more thing and then we'll move on, because I think that Firaxis in Crisis would be a really good episode for us to do in the future. Civ 7 reached 80,000 concurrent players when it first launched, and within 2 months, Civ 5 and Civ 6 had overtaken it in the number of concurrent players. That is a real concern for a company that is relying wholly on essentially one franchise. I mean, there's nothing from XCOM or anything like that, is there? They're relying on this one franchise to bankroll their entire studio. That's a real issue, but we will cover that in the future. I'll write it down now so I don't forget.
Okay, Al, but you haven't said what's your favorite DLC.
You're right, I haven't. And I'll come to that in a minute, because I wanted to change tack a little bit. And my favorite DLC might not be what you would consider to be a DLC. It seems to me that we have 3 different kinds of DLC. I'm happy for you to correct me if you think I'm wrong, as you both normally do. You've got your microtransactions, which are, and I'm thinking in terms of a species pack for Stellaris, where they released aquatics or they released plants or whatever they might do. So something very small, or like a content creator pack for City Skylines. You've then got your DLC, which is what the one you mentioned for Hearts of Iron, the ones that we've had for Civ, and the major ones for Stellaris. But because I'm very old, I go back in time, and I think you have another one, which is expansion packs. where you have something. So you asked me what's my favourite DLC. My favourite DLC is an expansion pack. It's Supreme Commander Forged Alliance. Introduced a fourth faction, a brand new campaign, changed the dynamics of the game completely. And another one going, I guess, ever so slightly further back is 0 Hour for Command and Conquer Generals. Now, I was playing that today because I think it's just brilliant. The Generals challenges which are in there, it just opened up this entirely new world for the RTS space when they released that expansion. But these were essentially standalone games despite being expansions of those base games. So Forged Alliance and 0 Hour, they're my favourites. But am I right? Is it fair to say there's those three different types of DLCs?
I think you're right. I definitely think that the terminology changed over time, like many things in the industry, but I also think that there's room for all three of them to still exist because, like you were saying, even if you broke it down by Stellaris terminology, right, your microtransactions or your species packs, but Stellaris had three different kinds of DLCs historically that they've only just recently started kind of going away with. They had their microtransaction species packs. They had mechanic packs that you would almost just call DLC now. So things like your astral, what was it, astral threads or astral
planes?
Yes, astral planes. It added in a new mechanic window and a bunch of new anomalies to the game. But then you have like your expansion packs. So Mega Corporations, by all accounts, was kind of a mechanics pack. It was like a DLC. It was not at the same level for them, I think, as Federations or Utopia. I could be wrong. Maybe it was an expansion pack, but when you look at things like Utopia, even now, it features less content. So it gets muddy because people are still innovating in that direction for how to sell us things.
I have a hot take though. I would say that expansion pack disappeared in favor of DLCs and updates. So basically they took the mechanics part out of the expansion pack and put it in updates, and they took the big changes and put it in the DLC.
Before I respond to you, I just want to check something. Did you just say you have a hot take?
Man, I'm from Poland.
What is this?
I don't know.
I have a hot take. Get yourself on TikTok, man. That's you should be ashamed of yourself.
You're horrible, guys.
I've got a hot
I don't
take.
know why I'm recording with you. And okay. I know why I'm recording with Jack. With you, I
don't know why we put it with you anymore.
Yeah, Adam, I say hot take. I know I've said it on an episode.
Thank you, Jack. You're awesome.
And I'm 12 years old.
Yeah, you see. Wait. I can feel a little small insult in there, but I will just pass it. You're on my hot take list at this point. I don't know, whatever.
Well, if you don't like it, you know where the door is. But the point I wanted to get to was, I think the change from this expansion pack to DLC perhaps happened around the onset of superfast internet. I remember going to the shop and buying the DVD for 0 Hour. I remember going to the shop and buying the DVD for Forged Alliance. But now everything is digital download. It's all coming at you from Steam. And maybe that's why we've had this transition from huge expansions, which introduced new levels, new races, new mechanics, new game modes, new entire campaigns as well in RTS games and other types of games. And perhaps now the reason why we're getting these smaller microtransaction-y style releases and mechanics packs is because you can facilitate the delivery of those packs now because everything is digital, everything is on a storefront, everything's on Steam, essentially, isn't it? Is that the reason why we saw that change? I was on the last episode of the Explominate podcast and we were talking about DLCs, but just for the benefit of Andy and Drexy and Ricky and the rest, we'd planned to do this episode before I was on your podcast, all right? We haven't stolen the idea, I promise. And one of the things that one of the people on the episode said there was, we haven't seen a change in the amount of DLCs that have been released. It's just back then, because it was delivered on a disc, it had to be quite comprehensive. And now you're just getting smaller ones, but you're getting more of them. So essentially it's the same amount.
I agree, but I think that it really comes from a vein of when you look back, because I'm like a video games historian at this point, when you look back at the way video games were developed at the time, You're right about internet being a major component of that. I think another thing too is before DLCs entered the common vernacular and to the social sphere of consumers for the industry, there was a completely different understanding on how to validate the price of a product. And even if we look all across the economy today, I mean, I don't want to make it a larger discussion that goes way beyond video games and media products. But when you look at the way people validated the price of products back then and the way that economies worked around the world, or looked around the world, I should say, you're talking about games that were coming out in the 90s that were packed full of content comparatively to some titles today, where obviously our games are bigger and fancier and prettier now and feature tons of content with larger development teams than ever. But back then, you're talking about groups of like 4 or 5 people that were innovating in genres consistently. But that's just because of the marriage of where the industry and technology was at the time. So that is to say, I think the reason why expansion packs existed back then was because you already had small teams creating some of the most innovative strategy games at the time without any idea on being able to pool information from the community, their communities at that time, on what people really wanted in the game. They just took the tools they already had, and their whole business practice was to release their game and then come into the office the day later and then immediately take the same exact tools you have with almost no changes and then just keep making campaign missions for that strategy game. And then if somebody can help design a new faction for the game, that'd be perfect. And then you release it without basically any idea for the most part what your community even thought of the original game. And so I feel like a lot of times it still kind of happens. People are working on DLCs before the games came out. Obviously, that's how development works. But back then it was like they weren't even gambling. That's just how you did it. And so that's how they pushed updates. That's how, obviously, yes. So I think the internet's part of it. But I think another part of it is just that's how it worked. They weren't really worried about innovating on their own games as much as people are now to keep justifying new prices and new expansions and new angles to market them. They were just like, let's take the dev kit for Supreme Commander and then immediately just start cranking out a massive expansion because it's easier now that we've already finished everything and it's just laying around. It's like they're basically just modding their own games.
I agree. And I think that when I think back to my early days in strategy gaming, the first expansion packs, which we would now call DLCs, that I bought were Counter-Strike and Aftermath for Command & Conquer Red Alert, and Core Contingency, and I forget the name of the other DLC or expansion, for Total Annihilation, which, because I was huge into RTS games in the mid to late 90s. And I think you're right. They released a complete game because you had to stick it on a disc. You had, of course, memory limits. You couldn't go over 4.7 gig, I think, on a DVD. But my first games were on CD-ROM. You know, if I don't go back to the games which I played on floppy disk. So they were restricted. They had to maximize the amount of information they put on a disc in order to sell it. And then, you're right, they released the game, then they went back to the office the next day after their release party, and they said, okay, let's make our expansion pack. And they proceeded to do that, and then released another huge amount of content, which was optimized to fit on one particular data storage device, and released that. But now they don't have those restrictions. Is them not having those restrictions in some ways a bit of a negative, because you're allowing developers to release games which are unfinished, with a plan to release, okay, well, we will just release more content for this over time?
So I would say it depends, because we just forgot, we put every game into the same bag at this point, I feel. So we talked about Paradox, we talked about Civilization games, Firaxis, but there are also indie games from smaller companies. So I would say I totally agree with you on the side of big publishers, because they have their own strategies. They basically, everything is prepared in advance. So we talked about Civ games basically being a firefighter at this point, and we talked about Paradox, who is prepared for future releases and has a calendar for the whole year and roadmap and so on and so forth. But we have also smaller publishers or even single solo developers who often do what was done in the past. So they release the complete game. And if this game sells, then they think about DLC. They are not thinking about it in advance. That's what I feel. I would say. And for me, the example of it is, for example, a game called Rimworld. I don't know if you are aware of this game, but it was in early access. It was released, and it was a huge success back then. And when you look at this, and I played the game back then, I played it after DLCs, and you could clearly feel that the game was simply complete when it was released. It was 100% complete, nothing was lacking. And even their communication, they say that they weren't prepared for such a huge success. And then they prepared the DLC, and if you think from distance and you look at from the distance on this game, it looks somehow similar to the older games you're talking about, Al. So the game was released, it was out, then you prepared DLC and you thought about it after. Maybe you thought before, but the game was out and it was a physical release, so you needed to finish the game completely. And that's exactly the same point for solo developers, because they don't have enough funding to not release a complete product at this point. Yes, they simply need to encourage people to buy their game, and then they can think about the future. Not like Paradox, because Paradox will have the base. I think that Paradox have like this flat number that says, okay, we sell this amount of game, and let's move on from this point. And for example, this Rimworld guys, or I don't know, on Song of Conquest, another example, they didn't know what if the game will be the success when they created it. So they finished the game, made a complete package, and they decided to make a roadmap, not before.
I don't know, man. I think that you may be giving people a little bit too much goodwill there, because I'm fairly certain that if you are releasing a game, you have in your mind, well, actually, we're gonna do DLC, because why wouldn't you? You know, if you're releasing a game, it's because you have belief in that game, whether you're I was going to say whether you're a AAA studio or an indie studio, but I guess for indies in particular, if they're releasing a game, they must have some idea, actually, and we're going to do DLC, and they start thinking about what those DLCs are going to be. But you're absolutely right on the point where they have to release a comprehensive game, base game, so that they make sure that it sells well in order to be able to fund the development of the DLCs. Whereas Paradox, they don't have that. They can release something as a vehicle for DLC because they know that they're strong financially. They can take a hit and then they can ensure that their DLC release strategy keeps them in the black over a consistent period of time. But yeah, I think that you're right, but I also think that you may be being a bit too nice. Am I just like really negative all the time? Maybe a bit too nice about these developers. I'm fairly certain that Rimworld, when they release the game, are like, and we are going to do DLC, and we have an idea what that DLC is going to be. And another thing, it makes financial sense to do that. You don't need a new engine, you don't need a new setting, you don't need new lore, you don't really need new models. You know, you can just create new maps or whatever, some new mechanics, but the base game is going to be the base for what you produce as a DLC. So it's probably cost effective to release a DLC following a release of a base game. It costs less to create DLC than it does to create a brand new title.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Adam was touching on, though, was that regardless, and I know depending on how he said it, right, like regardless of the intention of them to make the DLC, we're not villainizing the creation of DLC. In a large part, right, it's like what I said almost at the beginning with Stellaris, is that it took that game coming out and having a 10-year life cycle at this point for us to get DLCs that would not have ever been a part of the base game. You can't say that, like, there's no argument about them cutting that content. It's something that would have taken 10 years of feedback and them fleshing out more popular systems before this point to get interesting ones. So I think that in the same regard, right, if I pull from two developers we've actually had on the podcast, when you look at something like AI War from Arkan Games, I was surprised whenever I went and took a look back at AI War's DLCs for the first game, I should say expansions and the sequel, is that regardless of Chris's plans initially about whether or not he ever thought of those DLCs or planned for them or even cut that content to begin with, the reception for those expansions is pretty good because of the amount of content that he actually has in his expansion packs for his games compared to larger developers where we're complaining about microtransactions. He's releasing factions, he's releasing entire new mechanic systems that rapidly change, like vastly change the mechanics of the game. And a large part of the positive reviews across Steam for AI War 1 and 2's expansions are talking about how like the game feels completely different with the inclusion of these mechanics, or it gives you a reason to replay the game where you can do a normal run, like, you know, similar to Stellaris. You can replay the game by having the DLC downloaded and never interact with it, but the amount of systems it includes is worth an expansion price. And the same thing I would say is for Age of Empires 2, because it took an entire lifetime for that game before we started getting these cool story packs.
I just want to clarify, I wasn't villainizing either indie developers or AA, AAA developers for releasing DLCs. I appreciate when people release good quality downloadable content for their games. I'm not villainizing them at all, just to clarify.
I just can't tell past your frown.
Nice.
Any final thoughts, gentlemen, before we wrap up?
Yes, I have a final thought that I wanted to touch on. I know that we didn't want this to be a negative DLC episode, but I wanted to run back to something we were talking about before because it's very topical right now. City Skylines does some of the worst DLC in Paradox's entire catalog. I just have to say, like, before people get angry at me, no, I don't actually own any of City Skylines DLCs, but there's a reason why. I cannot justify the content subscription for their DLCs. It's from all of City Skylines 1. I cannot justify their price tags, or like maybe even their discounted price tag. They just don't add anything to the game. Like, the first expansion for City Skylines 1 added a free day-night cycle, and then it adds buildings. Like, as someone who does not care about cosmetics in games for the most part, what I want are features. I want mechanics, and I cannot, like, if the snow DLC adds winter-themed maps, it doesn't even add a seasonal mechanic, from my understanding. And it's not like I'm just completely passing over these things. I've tried to look at them. I'm expecting to see not even a massive amount of features. For the price that they're asking for, which is only usually like $12, $13, that's less than a mechanics pack for Stellaris. I'm expecting buildings that operate differently, and yes, they have them, but like their first DLC that added a free update for Day-Night Cycle, it lets you take criminals from police stations and move them to a prison. Like, that's the kind of stuff that would be in an update for a different Paradox game, and this is the same publisher. And that I'm going to finish it off here so you can say your piece, Al. But this Race Day expansion that they just came out with for the 11th anniversary of City Skylines, that should have been free. I'm sorry. But the game its development has ended. We've already covered that Paradox completely just kicked Colossal Order to the curb. They've scoured their talent and replaced them with a new developer for City Skylines 2. And City Skylines 2 is a game that has come out and been middling, and people have been asking for updates for. So this is my hot take. I just think that the expansions for City Skylines 1 are terrible. I don't know if City Skylines 2 is going to have good expansions until they fix that game. People have liked their first update from, Ice Flake? That's good. But they have Tantalus, who I believe is the publisher or the developer they use to do Tantalus is the developer that Xbox uses to
port the games
remaster.
Across.
Yeah. And like Tantalus, I think, does the console ports for Paradox, or some of them. They have a rocky relationship. So they're the ones that ended up developing this Race Day DLC. That rings really poorly to me. It feels like they kicked Colossal Order to the curb, handed over the dev kit and the engine to Tantalus, and then paid them a contract to come out with this Race Day update for the 11th anniversary. And then they put a price tag on it.
Okay. City Skylines is my second most played game. Stellaris is my most played. And I really enjoyed a lot of the City Skylines DLCs. Like, I really did. I thought some of them were brilliant. Mass Transit was great. It introduced trams and airships and all sorts of things like that. Campus allowed you to do entire university campuses. Industries was brilliant. It introduced forestry, ore, and oil industry zones, as in dedicated industry zones, and airports allowed you to build fully fledged international airports. They were brilliant. I really appreciated them. I really enjoyed them. In fact, the only ones that I don't have are the most recent ones, plazas and promenades and financial districts. That's on the expansions, not the content creator and the smaller packs. But the actual major expansions which introduce new mechanics, the only ones I don't have are the most recent two, I think. And I really enjoyed them. I thought they were great. But I suppose this is maybe the thing, because I was so into Cities Skylines. I played like 6,000 hours or something like that. It's ridiculous. I absolutely just loved that game. Maybe beauty's in the eye of the beholder. If you enjoy a game so much, you are going to appreciate and enjoy those expansion packs. Whereas if you think a game is, it's all right, but it's not the best, then you're going to be entirely dismissive of a developer trying to introduce new content for something which you're actually not that interested in. Is that the climax, the summary for this episode? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder? Because that certainly seems to be the way with Jack and I's complete different take, not hot take, different take on City Skylines DLCs. I think they're great.
I think you are great, guys.
That's why Adam's my favorite.
Thank you, mate. You're my favorite too.
Gentlemen, as always, you're legends. Thank you very much for turning up week on week on week. It's really appreciated. I know that sometimes I can be a bit of a hard taskmaster and crack the whip, and you're doing this for free. And I think that I would just like our audience to appreciate you guys for coming and talking about these things and putting up with my miserable face. So it's really appreciated. And thank you as well to our audience, because without them, we really wouldn't be doing this. It's the people who listen to this on a weekly basis who make it worthwhile. And if you comment on our videos or you comment on episodes and tell us that you've actually listened to it, it actually really makes my day, because I'm sad like that. But it really makes my day if I get a comment to say that you've really enjoyed an episode. So if you've enjoyed this, or if you disagree with us, drop us a comment, let us know what you think. And if you go to criticalmovespodcast.com, which is our main website, you'll find all the ways to get in touch. We've got links to our Discord, to our forum, to all of our social media. And you can also read Jack's excellent review of Heart of the Machine, which is on there. And I'll drop the link direct to that in the description of this episode, be it on Spotify or any of the other podcasting platforms or on YouTube. Check it out. Let Jack know what you think of it, because I think he's a proper wordsmith. Adam, thank you, as always.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Jack, for the episode. It was fun.
And thanks to Jack as well.
Oh, thank you, Al. You flatter me. You flatter me. And for what it's worth, everyone, he was smiling the whole time he was talking about you guys. And thanks, Adam. Thanks for the episode.
That's enough love. We've been Critical Moves. Thanks so much for listening. Take it easy. Goodbye.